to the sales. He knows what he's looking at. We're very fortunate to have him here every morning to help us see what we're seeing on the track. To his left, another very good assessor of horse talent. And I have to say, as I was interviewing people standing still, I did think of Donna, and she does it on horseback after the Derby. So always good to, I don't want to say walk, crawl an inch in someone's shoes and see what she's able to do. Very happy to have Donna Brothers Barton here. And to her left, Steve Bick from At the Races with Steve Bick. It's always a pleasure to be on his show, and it's a pleasure to have him here today. So we're going to get going, and I'm actually going to lead Steve with the first question, because then I sort of wanted him to play traffic cop a little bit, since he's so used to doing it on the radio and doing it so well. But Steve, I said it during the interviews, the post-draw sort of lived up to the hype in my mind, because all the top contenders, as Gary said, have no excuses from the post-draw.
Very much so. There are certainly some aspects of the race that will be determined by how some horses lined up, most notably with Promises Fulfilled and Flame Away shoulder to shoulder and being inside Justify. And the two of them, Promises Fulfilled and Flame Away, they figured to be on the lead and near, and now you've got them probably prompting each other. Justify, I suppose, could have drawn a little better, but there's nothing wrong with that. There's the speed outside of him, and I think Mike Smith has got every opportunity to set up shop wherever he wants. Mendelssohn getting the 14 hole, that open space, we talk about it, oh, it's so advantageous, the 14 and 15, but Donna will tell you that horses run to open space, and there's maybe too much room in some cases. Then you look outside and inside, the horses, they're going to come from deep off the pace. No harm done for Free Drop Billy, Firenze Fire, Combatant. There was no horses utterly compromised by the way the pills came up.
With the exception of Solomini, who drew the 17 post, and for
So
some unknown reason, no horse has ever won from the 17 post. And I just think that's an odd statistic, but I wouldn't want the 17 post.
Well, and you talk, Don, I don't know if you play poker, but you got to talk to a lot of trainers after the draw. Did you get a sense if any were happier than others, or what they were thinking?
I think Dale wasn't super pleased with that inside draw with the number 3 with Promises Fulfilled, and the 2 with Free Drop Billy, because you kind of have to send him away from there. Now, Promises Fulfilled was always going to go. I talked to him, as you mentioned, after the draw, and I said, in the Florida Derby, you said going in, we're going to go. And then you went in a suicidal pace. And when I talked to you afterwards, I said, was there a plan B? And you said, no, we should have maybe had a plan B, but there wasn't. And so I said, is there a plan B this time? And he said, no, we're still going to the lead. So, the Flame Away probably is going to show some speed too, but I would venture to say that Promises Fulfilled gets the lead in the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, and the post-draw, obviously one of the last pieces of the puzzle, and for me, the very last piece is how they're training up to the race, looking on the track, and that's a big reason we bring Gary Young in here. Gary, I know you're a Justify fan, but as we've seen several of the last few years, even with the favorite on top, plenty of money to be made, especially in that superfecta that paid $70,000 last year, getting the right horses underneath. What have you seen this week, or shorter term since their last races, that telling you who might be going in the right direction?
Yes, it is true that Justify is my top pick in the race. There are some long shots in here that could make the trifecta and superfecta really pay for your trips home in this race. I've really liked the way Hofberg has trained since he's been here. I know he's eligible for one other than, but his race in the Florida Derby was a huge step forward. And I think the fact that Bill Mott brings his horse here is a huge vote of confidence. You know that Juddmonte horses are royally bred horses, and the owners let the trainers do whatever they want. So this is Mr. Mott, who's known to be conservative, choosing to bring this horse here. I could see this horse definitely hitting the board and making the superfecta or trifecta pay a lot of money. I think Good Magic at 12-1 is very live too. I like the way he galloped this morning. I think it speaks volumes for the depth of this race. When the defending Eclipse Award winner has just won the Bluegrass, and he's Cub's 6th choice in this race. This is this is a grown man's derby this year, Ed. It really is.
Yeah, and a lot of talk this year about how talented this group is, Steve. And all of us, one of the pleasures of the Derby is we start looking at it months in advance. Points race started in September. What do you make of the depth of this field, Steve?
I think it's a little deceptive. I think it's going to be a lot easier to make the assessment Saturday night, but it feels like there's an elite or three, a group of solid horses, and then, as Gary might say, hot and dirty candidates.
There always are a few hot and dirty. They're galloping out past Donna when she's already starting to interview the winner. And we should mention Donna is involved with Starlight Racing, which is a part owner of Justify, an added excitement to the week for you along with your NBC duties. But what do you make of the depth of this field?
It's, I've been covering the Derby with NBC since 2001, so for a while, and it's definitely the best field of horses I've ever seen come to the starting gate for the Kentucky Derby. We really always have to guess every year, and so the only tool that we really have to compare apples to oranges is the figures. So we use the speed figures, we use the Ragozins, the Thorograph sheets, Brisnet, Breyer, we've got all these different figures that we use. And if you compare figures with this year's horses versus recent years, these figures are just so much stronger. And so that's how we can compare this field to last year or the year before. But at the end of the day, we don't really know until they go to stud, and then whether or not they're a successful stallion, and then we deem that that was a really good year. But from right at this point, it looks like the best group of horses I've ever covered.
When you mentioned stallions, and one name we'll definitely hear a lot of is Scat Daddy, sire of the top two choices, as well as Flame Away. And some concern from some about him getting the 1.25 miles with his progeny. The Stormcat line is 0 for the Derby. Gary, I know you looked at a lot of horses, not only on the track as they're getting ready to race, but as racing prospects at the sale. What do you make of the pedigree of this group, and specifically the Scat Daddies going 1.25 miles on dirt?
For as prolific a stud as Scat Daddy has been, and we knew when he passed away at an early age a few years ago that it was a blow, but it has been since his passing that we've really came to see just what a blow it was to the game. I mean, this horse is a terrific stallion. He was a shuttle stallion in that he went down to South America for a while. And most of his success to this date has been on turf. As a matter of fact, until the recent emergence of Mendelssohn and Justify, Scat Daddy had one Grade 1 winner on dirt. But he was a terrific stallion on turf, and now all of a sudden here he is with a very strong hand in one of the strongest derbies there is. Are they 1.25 mile horses? That's debatable, but I mean, especially in Justify's case, if you look at the horse, I mean, he is a very imposing, massive horse. His stride is enormous, and he has a guy training him that is not afraid to train a racehorse, and he has trained this horse for this 1.25 miles to the minute. So he might lose on Saturday, and it might be because of inexperience or Derby luck. There's a few horses that are eliminated every year, not on their own making. But I don't think he's going to lose because he's not capable of going 1.25 miles or that he's not prepared to go 1.25 miles.
Hey, Ed, I'd like to ask Gary a question, if that's okay.
Of course.
So at Santa Anita, they have this really cool thing where they actually weigh the horses before the race. And the race prior to the Santa Anita Derby, I got the weights from both Justify and Bolt Doro because I was covering the Santa Anita Derby for NBC, and I wanted to see how they had held their weight from prior to that race. So Justify came into the race prior, that was an allowance race, prior to the Santa Anita Derby at 1,258 pounds, which by the way is a pretty massive animal. Most of the thoroughbreds that you'll see race will weigh somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100 pounds. So at 1,258, a big boy. He came into the Santa Anita Derby at 1,251, so he had lost 7 pounds. When you weigh that much, we don't consider that really a weight loss. Boldoro had weighed 1264 when he came into his race prior to the Santa Anita Derby, and when he came into the Santa Anita Derby, he had lost about 30 pounds. And he certainly regressed in his race. Now, I haven't seen either one of them train regularly since then. The only time I've seen him was on the track this morning briefly. And so my question is for Gary. And Gary, when you looked at him in the morning from the race prior to the Santa Anita Derby to the Santa Anita Derby, and since then, what's been your assessment of how they've held their weight and their flesh?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I left town to go to the sales shortly after the Santa Anita Derby, and I've only seen these two colts on video since then. When I saw Justify today, I sent Mr. Baffert a text and I said, either your pony has gotten smaller or this horse has gotten bigger, because he is just a massive, imposing horse, and I don't think he's lost any weight. I think he's just he's a beast. He is just a beast. And you know, Bolt de Oro, he is a very tall horse. He doesn't carry as much weight naturally as Justify. And
Well, actually, he weighed more than
no,
Justify
he did,
before.
but because he's just so tall.
Oh, I
mean,
see.
I
So
don't,
it's more
he's
bone
not,
and-
he is.
yeah.
I mean, Justify looks like a tight end, where Bolt de Oro is like a really tall wide receiver, if I can go in football terms. I think, you know, I think as they get older, just looking at their body shape, I think that Justify will continue to hold the weight, and I think that Bolt de Oro might lose a little just because of the body shape he is, but I don't think it's 30 pounds to a horse that massive. I don't think could be used as a real excuse to lose the race. I think he may have bounced off that race in which him and Mackenzie ran a very hard race, and they had a little bumping contest and everything. And you know, and it was his first race in a while. And you know, a lot of people do believe that when you run a very hard race off of a layoff, that your next race might not be your best. So we'll see. We're going to see what happens on Saturday. But I think after getting shut out last year, that California is very, very well represented in this year's Triple Crown.
Well, Donna had a question for Gary. If you have a question for us, there's a table up here. A gentleman wearing a red lanyard would be happy to pass that question on to us. So see him, and if you're out there in the social media land, ask your question, and we'll get it to us electronically as well. And one of the questions we had, somewhat related to what we talked about, Steve, with the depth, and you mentioned, and I agree with you, there's definitely an elite tier, and then others that some better chances than others. I want to ask you, and we talk a lot about this on your show, what does that mean for your wagering strategy when it's that segmented, that you know who the contenders are, probably some prices you like better than others, some long shots you give a little bit of a look to but don't see them at the top tier? How does that coalesce to how you'll actually bet your money on May 5th?
And this is a topic that a number of times at various big opportunities during a race year, Breeders' Cup, Triple Crown, big summer events, Saratoga, Arlington, etc., Del Mar. These are things that don't get talked about nearly enough. We spend so much time handicapping and analyzing the horses and the sequences, and not enough time plotting a strategy in terms of ticket building and budget allocation, money for action bets, money for your prime bets, and that is time very well spent between now and Friday. And that is to lay out these 2 days of racing, knowing where you're gonna put your money when it comes to multi-race wagers. You've got multiple pick fours and pick fives both days. You've got the 2-day wagers, the Oaks Derby double. You've got the Oaks Turf Classic Derby pick 3. Then virtually dozens of rolling pick 3s and rolling doubles. So where you're portioning your money, and then particularly when it comes to the 14-horse field in the Oaks, the 20-horse field in the Derby, building, let's say, at the very least, your trifecta and superfecta bets. For those of you that play the Super High Five, which is a high wire act in an 8-horse field, let alone in a 20. You have to commit and you have to not be afraid to eliminate horses. And you can't necessarily let win prices determine what horses you're going to eliminate. You have to think about race flow. And when it comes to Derby, it's unique in that there has been historically certain structures and just regular results when it comes to late runners, really no matter what the pace is. Even in relative slow-paced Derby paces, there's always going to be at least one horse that is going to rally into the slow pace and get into the super. Depending on what they perform and how fast the pace has been, will determine whether it can be a commanding curve and get up for second, or any of Dallas Stewart's late runners. Horses like That's What I'm Talking About. Horses like Make Music for Me, Steppenwolfer. These are horses that had no shot to win the race, but they made the triple and the super what they were. So you do two things. You basically look at horses whose form you respect and who, even though they can't win, you can see them running on and getting into the number, and you basically feather them in with the key horses who you think are the best win candidates and the horses that you expect to run well. I mean, personally for me, it's Justify, Good Magic, and Bolt Doro, and then I'll feather in probably 6 or 7 horses in the second, third, and fourth slots in the super plays, and in the third slot and second slot, basically I'm King Justify basically up and down. And don't be afraid to put those big price horses into second, because it happens. It happens often. So ticket structure and identifying the horses that can invade, there's going to be horses people just aren't even going to think about because they can't win. You don't need them to win. You need them to run into your number and onto your tickets. So be sure to understand the difference between those two scenarios.
One of the things I always think about is everyone wants to be right about the Derby. You want to pick the winner. What I don't think there's enough attention on is you have to be willing to be wrong as well and have some strong opinions that maybe go against the grain. One of mine is Magnum Moon is not for me, and in a 20-horse field, you can't use them all. So that's a horse who I figure to take money, who I am a bit against. Now, Justify, I don't love, is the favorite. 5-2, 3-1's a little light for me, but I do like Hofberg. I share Gary's views of him. I like Lone Sailor a little bit. 2 horses that, as Steve pointed out, have the run style that maybe can crash the exotics. If Justify wins at 5-2, I'm not ripping up tickets if Hofberg is second at 30-1 or Lone Sailor is second at 40-1. Those are the types of things you need to think about when playing the race and give yourself a chance at a really big score. Donna or Gary, any last thoughts on betting the race with this type of depth before we get to our next question?
I have a question before I let Gary answer, because I'm not a big bettor. I call myself an opportunist, so I will bet occasionally when I see a good opportunity. But I'm learning from your guys' betting strategy here, and so my question is, do you guys take that horse, that Lone Sailor, that Hofberg, for your second spot with, say, the 3 horses you used, or do you use those 3 and take them for the fourth slot for the superfecta kind of wagerings?
You can kind of mix them in, like, you're probably going to play more than one superfecta. And with horses like that you can't see winning, you'd probably be more apt to put him in the 4 slot. But if he does happen to run third or something, you don't want that to cost you and watch that make the superfecta pay $50,000 or $60,000 and like, God, I only had the horse in 4th. What an idiot I am, So you don't want to do that. This race, I kind of from a trifecta and superfecta standpoint, I think that you kind of need to look at horses that you can see hitting the trifecta or super that are over 12-1 or 10-1 that are double-digit odds. And for me, those horses in this race were Good Magic, Hofberg, and Vino Rosso. I think all 3 of them are pretty safe bets to get the distance. I think at a time, if it does happen that, and I think there's a chance that it will, that Justify runs these horses into submission and there's a lot of dragging tongues coming down the stretch, those three horses have the running style where they could kind of pick up the pieces and complete the superfecta or trifecta and make it pay something. That's all dependent on whether Justify is as good as I think he is. But if he is, and those horses come behind him and run second, third, and fourth, the superfecta could still pay very well.
Yeah, as it did last year with Always Dreaming as the favorite. Orb in 2013 was the favorite. That super paid $25,000. Shifting gears back somewhat to the post draw, but Don, I wanted to ask you. You have experience on horseback in an actual race. Mendelssohn drew post 14, which is the final spot of the main starting gate, and we had a question of how that could affect his running style with the opening to his right, dissimilar from most of the other spots. There's a gap before you get to the auxiliary gate. What will be going through Ryan Moore's head before those gates open in terms of what he'll want Mendelssohn to do with the extra gap and just how the beginning of the race will unfold?
Yeah, Steve alluded to it earlier. Horses run into open space, and that's probably the worst draw for Mendelssohn because, well, I guess the one post could have been worse, or the 15 would have been as bad. But for him, it's the worst draw because there's open space to his right, and he hasn't started here at Churchill Downs, at this distance. And we saw how hard, if you watch the UAE Derby, how hard Ryan Moore rode him away from the gate, rode him very aggressively away from the gate to try to get early position on a track that had been speed favoring and in a race that he needed to get the points to get into the Kentucky Derby. So he's going to send him away from the gate. We know that. I think from that standpoint, it's not bad because he doesn't have a horse who's going to come over on him quickly from the outside post. So from that standpoint, it's good. But the horse will probably break out. He'll break into the open ground, and especially because the European horses go different directions. Sometimes they leave the gate, they go to the left, sometimes they go to the right, and so they're always like looking for that space. So I should mention, though, that Ryan Moore is arguably the best rider in the world. He's won Group 1 or Grade 1 races in 10 different countries at least, and so if anybody can do it, he can. And I'm glad you brought up Mendelssohn, Ed, because I was going to, because I want to hear your thoughts on him, because we've heard some of Steve's horses. We know that Gary loves Justify, and I'm going to say for the record, I think whoever wins the Derby has to beat Justify to win it, but I also know that Ed DeRosa likes Mendelssohn, and I did a handicapping show with him in 2015 that was about a month before the Kentucky Derby. Hear that again, a month before the Kentucky Derby, and he said, not only do I think American Pharoah wins the Derby, I think he wins the Triple Crown. So when Ed talks, I listen, and I know he liked Mendelssohn. I want to hear why.
I do like Mendelssohn, and typically I don't like the UAE Derby horses. I always worry about the ship over, but you mentioned Ryan Moore being one of the best in the world. Trainer Aidan O'Brien is the best in the world, to my mind, and he shipped to Australia and won. He shipped Mendelssohn to San Diego last year and won a Breeders' Cup race. He knows how to get the job done, so this is 1 year I am in the UAE camp. My top pick is Audible, post 5. I'm a big believer in the Florida Derby form. Hofberg was second, who I also like, so why not the winner as well? And you mentioned the speed ratings. Until Justify came around and won the Santa Anita Derby with a 114 brisnet, Audible's 107 in the Florida Derby was the fastest of this group. So to me, he fits right there. As you said, you'll have to beat Justify to get to him, but Audible and Mendelssohn, I think, have the best chance to do it. And that goes into another question we had from a new bettor, curious how to bet the Derby, and this is a topic near and dear to my heart because I think when it comes to the Kentucky Derby, a lot of people, and it's fun, I encourage the gambling, don't get me wrong, but sometimes they sort of bet against themselves with how they end up betting. And being an employee of twinspires.com, I know how many new people we have come into the game on Derby Day. And to me, when it comes to the Derby, if you're new especially, and jump in if you disagree or agree, or your strategy for new players, pick your horse and bet it across the board. And sometimes show isn't necessarily the best pool to be in, but I think American Pharoah paid $5.40 to show, something like that. I mean, even the favorites across the board give you a good punt. And the goal of any race is to win. So if you're new and you want to dip your toe and you say, I'm going to bet the Derby, to me, that's where to start, and it causes you, saves you from some heartache. As Gary said, you back 6 horses, you get 2 of them right, and you're wondering, oh, I didn't win. Well, if you get the winner right, you're going to win. So to me, that's my advice to a new bettor. I think it's a great question, and we welcome you to the pools. It's the greatest game to me.
So when you say bet against yourself, you mean bet the horse you like across the board. Don't bet 2 horses to win because you're betting
Exactly.
against.
You know, I've been to some Derby parties before. I'm fortunate enough to be here every year, and been to Keeneland. And novice bettors, they pick 3 horses, and they'll bet 2 to place, and they'll bet the other one to show. That's no fun. I mean, that's just that you're not going to win that way. Give yourself a chance, have an opinion, and go with it.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And the across the board way of going, it's not a bad way at all. Taking a small exacta box with 3 horses, that might not be a bad way. But the across the board bet for people that haven't done it before, if you win, you're going to win. If you run second, you're probably going to make some money, and depending on who the horse you pick is, even if he runs third, you might make money. You know, in a 20-horse field, it's a totally different animal from a gambling standpoint than it is in a lot of the races nowadays when the field sizes are much smaller. I mean, there's going to be, like you said, American Pharoah, probably the greatest horse of our last 20 years that we've seen. He paid $5 and change to show in the Kentucky Derby. Why? Because there's 20 horses in the race. And if you're just dipping into the pool and this is going to be one of your first ventures, yeah, go ahead and bet across the board, and obviously I hope you win, but even if you run second, you're going to make some money and you're going to get the rush.
Steve, anything to add there?
I would add that there's a unique bet for fairly new players. That's the 2-day Oaks Derby double.
You read my mind.
You don't necessarily have to have a great opinion in both. If you have a good opinion in one, you'll end up potentially doing very well. The pool is very large, and there's a lot of extraneous coverage. There's combinations that are just not even remotely possible. When you look at some of the winners we've seen from Friday to Saturday, and maybe the best example was Lemons Forever and Barbaro, where there were people that absolutely loved Barbaro going into Saturday and pushed the all button, singled to Barbaro, and they ended up with Lemons Forever, the longest price in Oaks history. He ended up with a terrific Oaks Derby double. So you can, if you've got an opinion in one or the other, a strong opinion, maybe on Friday this year, personally, Midnight Bijou to me, I think is a overwhelmingly likely winner in the Oaks. Maybe you like Monomoy Girl off the strength of her campaign, but taking your strong opinion either on Saturday or Friday and then spreading the wide net the other day, it will get you invariably an overlaid payment in that double. And so there's some fun pools. And again, because of the size of the wagering that goes on Friday and Saturday, there is a lot of coverage. The pick threes, for instance, you got 50-cent wagers. Use the increment, the low increment. People say, well, we can't use the dollar super. Maury Wolf today, who's one of the biggest bettors in the country, told people today on the show, avoid the superfecta pool. He says he wants nothing to do with it. And Maury is a multi-million-dollar a month bettor. And that's being conservative. He says use the increment, use the 50-cent tries to your advantage. 50-cent pick threes, use it to your advantage. Anywhere you've got a strong opinion on the card, no matter how new you are to the game, there's a horse that you've seen this winter or late last year that's going to be on this card, River Boyne in the American Turf. How likely is he to win, Gary, for instance?
He's a runner.
Stone runner. You could take a horse like that, single on either side and through all the pick threes involving the American Turf. And even a horse like Rushing Fall, who's seemingly, she's going to enter today as well, but more likely to run on Friday from the 11 hole in the Edgewood. She's going to be 3 to 5 if she runs on Friday. you can use her to your advantage, because on either side of races like that, there's big fields, and even if there's a low-priced winner in amongst the pick three, it invariably overpays, because there's people that are betting extraneous combinations. There's a lot of dead money in these pools these 2 days. It's why a lot of people, I got friends, they, between Breeders' Cup and this weekend, they haven't bet $1. Literally have waited from Breeders' Cup, and now they'll start to bet Triple Crown season and then into Saratoga and then through Breeders' Cup, and then they'll take the winner off, because these are the days you wait for as a horse player.
Absolutely.
Hey, Ed, I have one more bet that's just a fun bet. It only costs $40, and there's a good reason to do it. You just bet $2 to win on every horse who runs in the Kentucky Derby. And the reason you do that is because, let's say Justified does go on to win the Triple Crown, then you've got the $2 win bet. And let's say that you have a big payoff and the horse pays $80, then you can prove that you bet on that horse, and there's no reason for you to ever tell anybody that you also bet on the 19 other horses.
That's called a spray and pray approach.
Well, the horses are on the track for the first race, and I did want to touch on that Oaks Derby double, so I thought that'd be a good way for us to get out of here to give Oaks picks and hit the Derby too. But I was looking basically for a 3x3, if you were, and not saying you're going to play it this way, but just so everyone knows kind of what our opinions are. So it'd be $9 if you play 3 horses in the Oaks, 3 horses in the Derby, and I'll actually brag a little bit, and it didn't work out, so it's a humble brag. But you know, Steve mentioned Lemons Forever. I really liked Princess of Silmar a few years ago and played her in the double and was live to 10 horses, and then California Chrome won as the chalk. And I think I had a lot more fun going to bed that night dreaming of what might be in the Derby than I did actually cashing. But it's a great bet for that reason. And I'll start. My 3 in the Oaks would be Monomoy Girl, Eskimo Kisses, and My Miss Lily for trainer Mark Hennigan from New York. So one of the co-favorites and 2 decent priced horses I think could blow things up. And then the 3 I'll use in the Derby are Audible, Mendelssohn, and Hofberg. So if it comes My Miss Lily and Hofberg, we have some fun Saturday night. Gary?
I'm going to go in the Oaks. I don't usually like chalk, but I think the 2 chalks in that race, Monomoy Girl and Midnight Bijou, were strong. My long shot in that race is going to be Dale Roman's horse, Coach Rocks. She won the Devona Dale despite getting stopped at the 3/8 pole. She's got a good inside post. I think she's going to sit right behind the pace, and that would be my long shot in there. And for the Derby, I would go Justify, Hofberg, and Good Magic. Obviously, if Justify wins, that would be the least paying of the 3, but I'm not going to leave them out. And the other 2, if they would win and say Coach Rocks would win the day before, then you could go out and celebrate that night in Louisville.
Well, I'm only going to go too deep in the Oaks because I only like 2 horses. I like Eskimo Kisses and I like Midnight Bijou. I just like how versatile she's been. I'm sort of taking a stance against Monomoy Girl, even though everybody else seems to like her, because I'm not sure that her running style is going to be conducive to winning here at Churchill Downs. So I like those 2 for the Oaks. For the Derby, my 3 horses on paper have been Justify, Mendelssohn, and Vino Rosso, but I'm upset by the fact that I have not yet been able to see Mendelssohn in the flesh. He just got here yesterday afternoon. He's in quarantine right now. There's a good possibility I'm not even going to get to see him until Thursday morning. But if you want to follow me on Twitter, Donna B. Brothers, I will tweet how I feel about him. On paper, he's one of my top 3. Steve?
I'll take a $9 cold double, 10-7. Midnight Bijou, who I'll be very surprised if she does not just swamp this field. What she did in that Santa Anita Oaks, if you haven't seen it, pull it up. She basically made the Churchill Downs chandelier move, and in what, 150 yards, just overwhelmed and swallowed everybody up. She, I think, is a woman among girls, and Justify, I feel the same way. So 10-7 cold for me.
The Mike Smith double. as
It
it
is.
were,
That's a good
this
point.
year. Yeah. Well, if you think we sounded smart and you want to include all of our horses together, it costs $30. And if you didn't like what we said at all and want to use the horses we didn't mention, it would be $126, 9x14. So that might be some insurance we need to make against our opinions. But Donna, Steve, Gary, I really appreciate the time. It's been fun. It's my favorite week of the year, and hopefully it'll be everyone out listening after they win some money.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Good luck, everybody.